Hey everyone, Steve the Miner here. Got myself a pegmatite expert. What's your name?
Patrick Phelps.
And I have a question for you. What's the square root of pegmatite?
Tourmaline.
I'll take it.
Hydrothermal is part of it. So hydrothermal, when I hear hydrothermal, I think of almost like a separate water kind of phase that's moving through the earth and interacting with rock. But really what's happening with pegmatites is it's still very much derived from the original magma. So the original, all of the granitic rock you see around here. And what ends up happening is as this is crystallizing, and it's cooling off, it's getting cooler. One of the things that doesn't ever crystallize out is water. So this is kind of where the hydrothermal part comes from. And so all this water is dissolved in your magma. And over time, and as you crystallize more and more and more, the water concentrates. And eventually, it concentrates so much that it can't be dissolved anymore. And so it'll actually exhale out and becomes basically its own fluid phase. And in doing so, it then will take a lot of other elements along with it. So silica and in places like this, you're going to get things like lithium and some other kind of the rare beryl, so beryllium, some of those other more rare elements. And those kind of sit inside of this, either this water phase, but also in general, this very, very evolved silicic magma. And all of that kind of mixes all together, and eventually you get this singular body that is the pegmatite. Okay? So depending on when that water, the hydrothermal phase kind of comes out, depends on kind of what stage in it it would be. So actually around here, some of the pegmatites are actually in, not just within granites, but they can also be within salts or gabbros. So they're actually really late stage crystallization of that too. I'm not sure about the ocean one.
No, the salt felts.
But yeah, so it's this really, really evolved late stage magma. So you would have, kind of what this ends up working like too. So you have like this would be my felsic granite basically. So everything we see around here, and this would have been crystallizing. So these are crystals. These all would have been kind of settling out, and then eventually you kind of get near the top. You get this really, really, really felsic version. And then these, if they get enough water in them, they can kind of fracture up into little cracks, and they kind of fill that in, and then eventually that is what becomes the pegmatite.
So are there any ideas about why we would have all of these rare things accumulating or concentrating in these pegmatite fluids? Why do you think we get things like beryllium and boron and a bunch of the lithium is one of the elements you mentioned? A bunch of these elements that we normally, we see across the periodic table, but why would they end up concentrated in something like this? That's a very fractionated amount. What is this a result of?
Occurrence?
Occurrence? What do you mean by that?
Like the way that the minerals form through like metamorphism, like igneous, of like, what is that?
Yeah, so we are dealing here with magma, so we're crystallizing out of a magma, so definitely igneous, not metamorphic here. But when you think about the minerals you're crystallizing out of the magma, they have certain compositions, right? Think plagioclase, think orthoclase, think biotite. Remember the formulas for these things. You know exactly what goes into these minerals, right? So the elements we're concentrating here are the ones that don't go anywhere. None of the rock-forming minerals want to take on these elements. So they are now concentrating in what remains as you take more and more out of that magma due to crystallization. So you have this very small percentage of magma that's now focused or concentrated in water and lots of rare earths and rare elements or trace elements, as we would normally call them when we think normal granite. They are a major constituent sometimes of these pegmatites, and so that's how you have to think about this, right? You're fractionating them out, but what you're taking out is what what is being used up for these minerals, but what is not, it's got to go somewhere. So it ends up in this. You could almost call it as a garbage can.
And especially tourmaline is like the garbage can mineral.
Mineral. That's why it has a mineral formula that's this long. And so that's part of this. The other part of this is the grain size that you get here. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's where the water gets really to be a key part of all this. So pegmatite in general is actually it's from Greek, which means big crystal, big rock, that is the defining characteristic. A pegmatite does not have to be granitic, because it's essentially anything with like centimeter scale or larger crystals would be
Like your
considered
chunk.
pegmatitic. And if you look at everything in the wall here, I mean, if we're looking at, this is one tourmaline crystal here, for instance. That's large. You're not going to find in most granitic systems, you're going to find crystals that are on the more millimeter scale, or maybe a little bit larger. Or not just granitic, but igneous systems. So the reason why those get so large has to do with water. So to grow a crystal, A, I have to be saturated in that mineral, and B, I need to be able to get everything that makes up my mineral. I need to get it to wherever this thing's nucleating, growing from. So, and that has to do with diffusion. So how fast can everything move through the melt itself? And so when you add water to a melt, and this has to do kind of with the melting points too, where it depresses the melting point. One of the other things, it becomes less viscous, and it also means that you can now diffuse more quickly through it. So a water-rich melt typically has higher diffusivities of these elements. Yeah, I'll be one last quick point, and then if you actually really get to a true just water or almost more water-rich phase, then the diffusivities go way up, and so you can, instead of having just a bunch of little crystals, now you can make one very large crystal, actually very quickly as well.